Hello, ladies. This is Menopause, your management, your way, and Menopause, the state of affairs in the world today. This is Menopause Taylor, and I am here to fill your heads with more useful information for managing your menopause your way. You probably never imagined that there could be so much to menopause, but now that you are a student of Menopause University, you're becoming quite an expert on how to manage in the world of menopause. We're actually getting near the end of a unit on heart attacks. And closely related to heart attacks are blood clots. And I like to address all your concerns, and many women have concerns or questions about blood clots. So that's our topic for today. You may wonder why you need to listen to a podcast when you can just read my book and get the same information. Well, the truth is that there's no way to do in a book what I can do in a podcast or a video. In a podcast, I can really kind of make it fun for you and elaborate on things. And so whether you have my book or watch my videos, you'll love the way all of these things complement each other because I cover the same material but in various different ways for people who learn in different ways. So, blood clots. First, let me say that your blood is supposed to clot. Normal blood clotting is an essential part of the healing process for any injury. If it didn't clot, you would bleed to death with a simple cut in your skin. So clotting of your blood is a good thing overall. So we're not talking about the normal blood clotting process today. We're talking about abnormal blood clots. What we're talking about today is when your blood clots at the wrong time or in the wrong place. So we're addressing blood clots that are larger than desired and blood clots that harm you rather than help you. Now, there are many terms for blood clots, and while they may have some slight differences, for purposes of menopause, they all imply the same thing. They all represent the phenomenon of something blocking a blood vessel so that the blood and oxygen cannot flow to the body parts that are beyond the blockage. In all the podcasts on heart attacks, we've been talking about a blockage in an artery. And in the last podcast on stroke, I was also talking about a blockage in an artery. But with blood clots, we're talking about a blockage in a vein. So generally speaking, the difference between the two is pretty simple. Arteries carry blood to an organ, and veins carry blood away from an organ. And with regard to the many different terms for blood clots, some are very specific as to the cause or the location of the blood clot, and others are more general, but they all refer to the same general idea of a blocked vein. You may have heard any of the following terms to imply this phenomenon: thrombus, embolus, venous thromboembolism, deep venous thrombosis, or pulmonary embolism. You see, I give you the full names even though you live in a world where most names have been replaced by acronyms. And I'm always shocked when I see a TV commercial or anything that uses acronyms only and never tells you the full name for what they're advertising. You know, back in the olden days, we learned that you never ever use an acronym without defining it first. So to this day, I simply cannot use an acronym without defining it first. I should have been an English teacher. So now I'll tell you the individual meanings of these terms and or their acronyms. A thrombus is a blood clot that consists of both blood and fibrous material. Now, a thrombus is actually a normal event. It's the normal response to injury in order to prevent bleeding. So like I said earlier, your blood is supposed to clot. If it didn't clot, you'd bleed to death from small injuries. Instead, when you cut your skin, it bleeds, but eventually it stops bleeding. And the reason it stops bleeding is because a thrombus forms. Now, a thrombus is problematic when it clogs your vein. And just like the blockage in an artery to your heart or your brain, the tissue beyond the clot dies because it gets no blood or oxygen. An embolus is a blood clot that breaks off and travels from where it formed to some distant site where it blocks the flow of blood and oxygen. So a thrombus is stationary, but an embolus travels. Next is venous thromboembolism, or VTE. A venous thromboembolism is the same thing as a thrombus and an embolus. It's a blood clot in your vein that travels to a distant site and blocks blood flow. And it's actually a collective term for two different forms of thrombosis. There's deep venous thrombosis, or DVT, and there's pulmonary embolism, PE. A deep venous thrombosis, or DVT, is the formation of a blood clot in one of the deep veins in your body, like in your leg or your pelvis. A pulmonary embolus, or PE, is the blockage of your pulmonary artery or one of its branches. It's a blood clot that forms in one location, breaks off, and travels to the arteries of your lungs. So all these terms are very the same phenomenon. Blood clots are just a ball of blood blocking a vein. Now, sometimes people get all caught up in the minutia of one of these without realizing that they all imply the same thing in a general sense. I'm going to use the word blood clot throughout this whole podcast for all of them. So now we're ready to talk about the risk factors for blood clots. Remember, the risk factors for a heart attack was a big, long list. Do you know what the risk factors are for blood clots? Take this quiz question and see if you can answer it. Which of the following are risk factors for blood clots? A, surgery. B, genetic predisposition. C, immobility. D, obesity. E, birth control pills. F, cancer. G, pregnancy. H, long distance travel. I, a previous blood clot. J, HRT for menopause. K, all of the above. L, none of the above. What do you pick? Are you sure of your answer, or are you just guessing? Can you detect any patterns or commonalities in some of the options? Well, the answer is all of the above. They're all risk factors for blood clot, and now I'll discuss them. But I'm going to group them somewhat to reveal the patterns. First is your genetics. Some people have a genetic mutation that puts them at high risk for blood clots. Fortunately, most people who have a mutation know they've got the mutation, and they know what it means for them personally. Most other people have never even heard of these genetic mutations. Some of their names are like factor V polymorphisms, prothrombin G2021A mutation, antithrombin 3 deficiency, protein C or protein S deficiency. If you've made it to your postmenopausal phase of life and have never received a diagnosis of a genetic mutation that causes blood clotting, then please don't worry about it. You would have known about it long before now. In the same general category of genetics is the risk factor of a history of blood clots. If you yourself have had a blood clot before, you're at risk for another one. History can have a tendency to repeat itself. What you do not see on this list is a family history of blood clots. And that's because unless you have a heritable genetic mutation, your family's blood clots usually have nothing to do with you. Okay, so next is the group of all the following: surgery, cancer, immobility, obesity, and long distance travel. Now, if you're looking at that list thinking, what? They have nothing in common. Think again. The key to all of them is immobility. When you have surgery, you're mobile during your recovery. When you have cancer, you're immobile if you have to have surgery or you're depressed. If you're obese, you're probably very sedentary. When you travel long distances, you're immobile for many hours at a time. So the key is immobility. In medical parlance, we use the word stasis, and it means that when you're immobile, your blood flow gets sluggish. And when you're sluggish, your blood flow is also sluggish. And sluggish blood flow causes clots. So anything that limits your mobility either permanently or temporarily puts you at higher risk of blood clots. And the last category consists of pregnancy, birth control pills, and HRT for menopause. So this category is all about hormones. All sex hormones are associated with an increased risk of blood clots, and the higher the dosage, the higher the risk. So guess which of the three items in this category carries the highest risk? Your choices are between pregnancy, birth control pills, and HRT for menopause. It's pregnancy! By far, it's pregnancy. But you're young and spry and mobile and healthy when you get pregnant, so you don't give blood clots any thought at all. But the levels of both estrogen and progesterone are sky high during pregnancy, higher than at any other time in your life. And you've already learned from me that in many of these podcasts that hormonal birth control contains much higher dosages of estrogen and progesterone than does HRT for menopause. So birth control is the second highest risk in the hormone category. They increase your risk by 2 to 4 times. But again, unless you're obese or you're a smoker, you probably gave nary a thought to blood clots when you were using birth control either. The dosages of estrogen and progesterone in HRT are minuscule, even if you take the minimal necessary dosage to prevent a heart attack. So they pose the lowest risk in this whole category. But now that you're older and you value your health and your friends scare you to death about HRT and blood clots, you concern yourself about blood clots because it's as if it becomes more significant. And the longer you take HRT, the greater the risk. But be careful. People tend to hear something like that and then ascribe all the risk to that one thing. But there's more to it than that. There's one thing that increases your risk of blood clots more than anything, no matter what else is going on. It's age. The older you get, the greater your risk. Of course, the older you get, the more health problems you have, and the more sedentary you become, and the longer you remain immobile if you have surgery, etc., etc., etc. So be sure to consider the whole picture. Don't put all the blame on one thing. Rarely is a blood clot due to just one thing. I've talked to you about the Women's Health Initiative or WHI results with regard to heart attack and stroke, and I want to do the same for blood clots. Because the findings for blood clots were the pivotal findings that sent people scrambling. And when I tell women the real results, they usually can't believe them and they feel really deceived. But I still think it helps to know the facts and to understand what really happened in that study. And without going into detail about all the other diseases that study addressed, here's what the findings were for blood clots specifically. As you know, the study was done to determine if HRT was useful for preventing blood clots. But instead, the report result was that HRT caused blood clots. Now, I have taught you that you can't switch from prevention to cause in a research study, but that is precisely what they did in the WHI. And the exact wording of the media's report to you, the public, was: there was a 100% increased risk of blood clots in women taking HRT. 100% increased risk. What does a 100% increased risk mean to you? See if you can answer this quiz question. The WHI's report that HRT increases the risk of a blood clot by 100% means A, every woman who takes HRT is at high risk for a blood clot, which means that the 100% refers to 100% of people. B, no matter what one does to decrease her risk of a blood clot, the risk of a blood clot outweighs all other factors. In this case, the 100% refers to certainty.